The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out into to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Let's think a little about the background. What's going on behind the scenes in today's Gospel from Matthew? John the Baptist is in prison. His cell is dark and dank, because that's the way prison cells usually are. He probably spends a lot of time pacing, because he has nothing else to do. But John is bound by more than chains and 4 stone walls. He has misgivings about his life. So when he's finally allowed to have a visitor, he asks that man to carry a message, a question that will give him some answers. Now, I don't know about you, but at first glance, I found this an unusual choice for the gospel reading for the 3rd Sunday of Advent. I mean, we're just 2 weeks from Christmas. By this time, most of us have bought our trees, decorated our houses, gotten a good jump on our Christmas shopping. And when we come to church, we expect some progress to have been made there as well. We had John the Baptist last week. Certainly this week, we should be moving on to Mary and Joseph, or angels and shepherds, or something that will help get us into the Christmas spirit. But no, the people responsible for choosing our readings had chosen, instead of preparing us for the birth of the baby in Bethlehem, they decided to jump ahead some 10 chapters and 30 years into the middle of Matthew's account of Jesus' ministry. It just seems like a very strange choice for Advent. But you knew there had to be a but. I was doing some reading online, and my favorite contemporary theologian, or one of my favorite contemporary theologians, Dr. David Losey, says, this is not such a strange choice for the 3rd Sunday of Advent. He points out that it's probably been several months since John baptized Jesus and declared him to be the chosen one. And John has been getting some strange reports. He's having second thoughts. So he sends his disciples to ask Jesus quite plainly, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" And frankly, Losey says, John's doubts aren't really out of place in the season of Advent. In the midst of all the planning and shopping and celebrating we frantically engage in around this time of year, there does seem to be an increase in doubt and fear. Physicians, psychologists, and pastors all report increased requests for counseling. Admissions to mental health facilities rise, and suicides peak right in the midst of the holiday season. And so John, it would seem, is not alone in his troubles. To be fair, John's lack of confidence shouldn't really surprise us. He is, after all, in prison. And so far, what he predicted and longed for has not arrived. When John announced the coming of God's kingdom and proclaimed Jesus as God's anointed, he expected the world to change. Now, some months later, things seem the same. What John saw in Jesus was the culmination of all God's promises to Israel. Now, sitting alone in a prison cell, he is still waiting for those promises to be kept. And aren't we also still waiting for the fulfillment of the Christmas promise? I mean, isn't that what's so wonderful about Christmas? The promise of peace on earth and goodwill among all. But it's also what is so difficult about Christmas. The headlines and sometimes even our homes make it clear that peace and goodwill are as scarce today as they were just a few months or years or millennia ago. And so, try as we might to deny the darkness of the season and our spirits, we find ourselves in a mood as dark and dank as John's prison cell. Disappointed with ourselves, with the world, and even with God, which feels all the worse at Christmas time. Considering all of this, I wonder how John received Jesus' answer. I doubt that it was very satisfying. Jesus instructs John's disciples to go and tell him what they have heard and seen. But come on, John already knew what Jesus was doing. That's exactly what has provoked his doubts in the first place. And I can't imagine that John would take much comfort in the rest of Jesus' answer. Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. What kind of answer is that? Certainly it's not what John expected from Jesus. What John was probably looking for, what we are often looking for, is a strong Messiah for a strong people. John wants a Messiah who helps those who help themselves, who knows how to stand up for himself. A Messiah, in short, that you can be proud of. What he gets instead is Jesus. And measured against John's hopes and expectations, Jesus probably falls way short of the mark. Let's face it, the people that Jesus seems preoccupied with, the lame, the deaf, the poor, etc., these folks aren't exactly the movers and shakers of the world. In fact, they are the ones who are moved and shaken by every whim of the rich and powerful. These people aren't going to change things. They're the social outcasts and losers of John's day. They can barely fend for themselves, let alone help anyone else. So why in the world does Jesus make such a fuss about these people when John, apparently at the end of his rope, asks for some sign that Jesus is the one for whom John is waiting? Well, maybe it's that all these people do share something in common with John the Baptist. They are in need. Think about it. There's John pacing and pondering in his cell. He suddenly finds himself in a position of absolute need. And he discovers that he is one with all those in need, with the poor and the outcast and all the others who can boast of nothing except their dependence on God's own grace and mercy and protection. And here is where we find a clue to the last part of Jesus' answer to John, the part about not being offended by Jesus. Because if we claim to have made it on our own, to not need anything we cannot earn or make for ourselves, we will undoubtedly take offense at Jesus. Born in a stable, laid in a feeding trough, and ultimately hanged on a cross. But when we admit our need and identify with all those who depend on God, we discover in Jesus a God who is once and for all for us. This can be frightening. We live in a world that preys on the weak. We are taught from an early age to trust no one, to take nothing for granted, and to cover all the bases. And so when push comes to shove, we try to hide our weaknesses and fears behind our houses and our careers, or for that matter, behind our failings and our infirmities. Until, of course, we hear the word cancer or downsized, and we know ourselves to be just as fragile and vulnerable as everyone else. At these moments, the words Jesus speaks offer some measure of comfort. This is what we prepare for during this season, as God, our Emmanuel, comes near to us in the form of a flesh and blood infant. God takes on our lot and our life so that we may know of God's promise to us and for us forever. And so, even though, at these moments, we can know that whatever our misgivings, our disappointments, God is not disappointed in us and comes to us anyway, eager to join us in our weakness, to hold us in our insecurity, and to comfort us in our fear. God did not come as Jesus for the strong and the proud, but for the weak and the vulnerable. God in Jesus came for us. Amen.